The Fridge That Never Empties. Being a thoroughly honest account of one grandmother, one baffling appliance, and several guilty grandchildren. Chapter 1. In which I am defeated by a kitchen appliance. I want to be clear, from the very outset, that I am not a paranoid person. I am a reasonable, level-headed 31-year-old woman who holds a steady job, files her taxes before April, and has never once accused a household object of having a secret life. I say all of this so that you understand the full weight of what I am about to confess. My grandmother's refrigerator broke me. It started the way most family mysteries do. Not with a dramatic revelation, but with a casserole dish. Specifically, with the casserole dish my cousin Marcus discovered, wedged between a 12-pack of Greek yogurt and what appeared to be an entire wheel of Manchego cheese, the first time we staged what we'd come to call, with great affection and zero irony, Operation Empty the Fridge. Grandma Susie. Mrs. Susan Eleanor Kowalski to the postman, Susie, to everyone else, and Gran, to us. Lived alone in the same two-bedroom row house in Dayton, Ohio, that she'd shared with our grandfather until he passed a decade earlier. She was 74, spry in the way that only women of her particular generation can be spry, meaning she could outlast you on a walk, and still have opinions about the state of your posture, when you finally collapsed at the finish line. She had silver hair she kept in a no-nonsense bun, reading glasses perpetually perched on top of her head even when she claimed she couldn't find them, and the moral authority of a retired school librarian, which is exactly what she was. She also had, for reasons that baffled the entire Kowalski family tree, the most aggressively stocked refrigerator any of us had ever encountered. We're talking architectural levels of food storage. Shelves organized with a precision that suggested military training or, at minimum, a very firm opinion about where condiments belong. The vegetable drawer. And I say this with the reverence it deserves. The vegetable drawer alone contained more produce than my apartment sees in a month. I once opened it looking for a lemon, and found 3 kinds of leafy green I could not name, a bag of something purple, and what I'm fairly certain was a daikon radish the size of a small dog. The family's concern had begun gradually, the way concern tends to when you love someone. Gran lived alone. Gran was getting older. Gran, by any observable measure, was buying food for a household of 8 people when there was only one of her. And that one of her was a woman who ate like a particularly sensible bird. Small portions, nothing fried, and absolutely no nonsense about dessert on a weeknight. So we'd started dropping by to clear things out. Not intrusively, we told ourselves. Just helpfully. The way you help someone who is clearly, obviously, stubbornly buying too much food and letting it go to waste. I was the one who'd driven down for the first serious intervention, armed with good intentions, 4 empty canvas tote bags, and a small speech I'd rehearsed in the car, about how there was no shame in buying less. My cousin Marcus came with me, because Marcus comes to everything involving free food and the possibility of drama. Gran had greeted us at the door with the expression of a woman who knows exactly what you're up to and has decided to find it mildly amusing. "Katie," she'd said, opening the door wide. "Marcus. What a lovely surprise." The pause she put after the word, surprise, was doing a lot of work. "We were just in the neighborhood," I'd said. "You live 90 minutes away. It's a big neighborhood." She'd stepped back, gestured us inside, and gone to put the kettle on with the unhurried calm of someone who has lived long enough to know that whatever is about to happen will probably be entertaining. The fridge was, as advertised, magnificent. We filled 2 tote bags before Gran finished making tea. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, mug in hand, and looked at the bags with polite interest, the way you might look at a child who has very proudly assembled a puzzle that only has 12 pieces. "Taking some things home?" she asked. "We thought," I started carefully, "that maybe some of this might go to waste. If you're not able to get through it all." She said. "We just worry," Marcus added, already eating a piece of cheddar he'd liberated from the cheese drawer. "I know you do," Gran said warmly, patting his arm. "Have some crackers with that." We drove home feeling virtuous. We told ourselves we'd helped. We told ourselves she'd probably buy less next week. 2 weeks later, we stopped by again. The refrigerator was full. Not sort of full. Not partially restocked. Full. Abundantly, completely, aggressively full. As though our previous visit had simply never happened. As though the laws of consumption did not apply within a 12-foot radius of Gran's kitchen. "Did you restock everything?" I asked, standing in front of the open fridge with what I imagine was a fairly bewildered expression. "I shop on Tuesdays," Gran said. From the living room, very serenely, as though this explained anything at all. I looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at me. We both looked at the refrigerator. "This is a lot of food for one person," Marcus said. "I like to be prepared," Gran said. It became, over the following months, something of a family project. A puzzle. A recurring mission that my cousins and I accepted. With the solemn gravity of people who have absolutely nothing better to do on a Saturday. We'd drive down, we'd fill our bags, we'd feel helpful. And then 2 weeks later we'd return to find the fridge had somehow refilled itself, as though it were connected to some kind of supernatural grocery pipeline. My cousin Delia suggested Gran might be sleep shopping. My cousin Pete, who has a flair for the dramatic, floated the possibility of a secret admirer who expressed his feelings through bulk dairy. I, clinging to my reputation as the sensible one, maintained that there was a perfectly rational explanation, and that we would find it. Reader, I did not expect to find it the way I did. Chapter 2. In which I volunteer to babysit a Septuagenarian. The idea to stay overnight came to me in late October. Which in hindsight I should have recognized as the desperate act of a person who has been outwitted by a refrigerator for 4 consecutive months. It was my mother who first suggested it, with that particular brand of maternal casualness that means she has already decided what's happening, and is simply allowing you the courtesy of thinking it was your idea. "Your Gran mentioned the gutters need looking at," she said over the phone one Sunday, in a tone so breezy it practically had its own weather system. "And it gets dark so early now. I was thinking someone should go check on her. Stay a night or 2. Keep her company." "Sure," I said. "Who'd you have in mind?" There was a pause that I can only describe as pointed. "Oh," I said. So it was that I arrived at Gran's on a Friday afternoon with a weekend bag, a box of Earl Grey tea bags she'd mentioned running low on. And what I told myself was a simple desire to spend quality time with my grandmother. I was absolutely not going to spend the next 48 hours conducting covert surveillance on her grocery habits. That would be strange. I was a normal person. Gran, for her part, seemed genuinely pleased to see me, which made me feel only slightly guilty about my secondary agenda. She'd made soup. From scratch, obviously, because she viewed anything from a can with the weary resignation of someone who has standards. And we ate at the little kitchen table while the autumn rain came down outside. And she told me about the latest drama at her book club, which had apparently devolved into open warfare over whether a certain very famous novel counted as literature or merely a very long complaint. Maureen walked out, Gran reported with considerable satisfaction. She pushed back her chair and said, and I'm quoting now, "If I wanted to feel this miserable, I'd do my own taxes," and then she left. And you? I asked. What did you think of the book? Gran considered this with the gravity it deserved. I thought it was extremely well written and profoundly unpleasant. I gave it 4 stars. After dinner, we watched a nature documentary Gran had recorded. She had strong feelings about natural history television, and referred to the presenters by first name as though they were old friends. And then she made cocoa and we played 2 rounds of Scrabble, which she won both times by deploying words that I was fairly certain she'd invented, but which she defended with a serenity that dared me to challenge her. Quitch is not a word, I said. It's a type of grass, she said, adding up her points. Gran. Look it up. I did not look it up, partly because I suspected she might be right, and partly because the triumphant little smile she was wearing was too enjoyable to disturb. By 10 o'clock she declared that she was going to bed, and encouraged me to do the same, in the tone of voice that reminded me I'd once been 9 years old and actually had a bedtime. I tidied up the Scrabble board, washed the cocoa mugs, and settled onto the pull-out sofa in the spare room that still smelled faintly of lavender and old paperbacks. I told myself I was going to sleep. I absolutely intended to sleep. I was very comfortable, and the rain was very soothing, and I was going to close my eyes and have a normal, non-investigative night of rest. I lasted until about 2 in the afternoon the following day before I noticed something. Gran had gotten up at 6. I heard her moving around the kitchen with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone for whom sleeping in means anything past 6:15. And we'd had a very pleasant morning. She'd made proper breakfast. Eggs, toast, grilled tomatoes, the works. I'd helped with the washing up. We'd talked about my job. Fine. Her garden. Dormant but promising. And whether the couple 3 doors down were getting a divorce. Gran. Almost certainly. The recycling bin has been out since Tuesday. Then, around 2, Gran said she was going to potter about in the kitchen for a bit, and shooed me toward the living room, where a broadsheet crossword awaited on the coffee table. There are only so many times you can write ennui before you start to feel it personally. By 3 o'clock I drifted back toward the kitchen doorway, drawn by the smell of something warm and savory, and stopped. Gran was at the counter. In front of her were a dozen small plastic containers. The sensible, stackable kind with snap-on lids. And she was filling them, one by one, with the kind of methodical calm that spoke of long practice. A portion of something golden and stew-like here. A fold of something wrapped there. Neat, deliberate, efficient. She had not heard me in the doorway. She kept working, humming something low under her breath, reaching past the stacked containers to check something on a list written in her small, precise handwriting on a notepad by the stove. I stood in the doorway and watched, and felt something shift quietly in my chest. Chapter 3. In which the truth is both obvious and staggering. I did what any reasonable person would do in that moment. I retreated silently to the living room, sat down on the sofa, stared at the crossword without seeing a single clue, and waited. At approximately 4 in the afternoon, I heard the soft click of the front door. Then quiet. Then, about 40 seconds later, the door clicking shut again. I counted to 10, got up, walked to the narrow front hallway, and looked through the little porthole window set into the door. On the front step, arranged with the careful neatness of someone who takes presentations seriously, were the containers. 8 of them, stacked in 2 small groups, each cluster topped with a folded square of paper towel held down against the autumn breeze by the lightest possible thing, a smooth pebble from the garden. The arrangement was modest, almost invisible. You'd walk past it and think someone had set out recycling. You'd only notice if you were looking for something. I watched for a while. The street was quiet. Leaves skittered across the pavement. A bicycle went by. Then a young man in a high-visibility jacket came around the corner. At a pace that suggested he was running a few minutes late for something. Slowed as he approached Gran's step, glanced down, picked up one of the containers, tucked it under his arm with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before, and kept walking without breaking stride. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the bell. He was there and then he wasn't, and the stack was 7 containers instead of 8. I went and sat back down on the sofa. Gran appeared in the doorway of the living room 20 minutes later with 2 cups of tea, offered me one, and settled into her armchair with the air of someone who has had a perfectly ordinary afternoon. "Gran," I said. She was picking up her book. I saw," I said. "The containers. On the step." There was a small pause. Gran turned a page she hadn't read yet. "Did you?" she said, not as a question. "How long have you been doing that?" She considered this with genuine seriousness, the way she considered anything that deserved a proper answer. "About 3 years, I suppose. Give or take." 3. I stopped. Recalibrated. "For 3 years you've been putting food out on your doorstep. And we've been coming down here every fortnight to take it away because we thought you couldn't manage your shopping?" Gran smiled at the middle distance in a way that I can only describe as diplomatically fond. "You were very helpful," she said. "You meant well." Gran. The initiative was very admirable. "We took your food. You also brought it right back the next time you visited," she pointed out, reasonably. "Because you felt too guilty to eat more than half of it. I believe you returned a chutney I'd put out specifically because Derek doesn't like chutney." "Who's Derek?" "The man who takes the Tuesday evening lot. He works at the plastics factory on Birchwood Road. Night shifts. He has 3 children and a commute that takes 40 minutes each way, and his wife is back in school 2 nights a week." She said this with the ease of someone reading from a mental file she'd assembled carefully over time. "He likes the pasta dishes and anything with lentils. He is not fond of chutney or anything with too much coriander." I stared at her. "You know his whole situation?" "We've spoken a few times, before the arrangement settled. He's a very nice man." She paused. "He doesn't always take from the step anymore. Sometimes I leave the bag around the sides so his colleagues don't see, because he works with people who'd give him grief about it. Silly, but there you are." "And the others?" There are others? There's a girl from the dormitory 2 streets over. Engineering student. Works very hard, doesn't eat enough. There's an older gentleman, retired, who I suspect is too proud to tell his son how tight things are. There are 2 or 3 others who come less regularly. She turned another page. People have their pride, Katie. It's easier for them to take it this way. I sat with that for a moment. Outside, the light was going. Somewhere down the street a door opened and closed. And you didn't want us to know, I said. That's why you never said anything when we kept clearing out the fridge. I knew you'd worry, she said simply. Or you'd want to help, and then it would become a project, and someone would make a Facebook post about it, and then Derek would find out and he'd be mortified and stop coming, and the whole thing would fall apart. She looked at me over the rim of her mug. You see? I did see. I saw it all at once, very clearly, the way you sometimes see something obvious only after you've been staring at it from the wrong angle for months. So the reason the fridge was always full, I said slowly, is that you were restocking it every week to replace what you were giving away. And to replace what you lot kept taking. She agreed, with what I can only describe as cheerful reproach. Between the 2 of you and your cousins, I've had to buy an extra block of cheddar nearly every visit. In our defense, I said weakly, it's very good cheddar. It is, she conceded graciously. I buy it from the market. Derek says it's too sharp for his children, but I think children should learn to have opinions about cheese. I put down my tea and looked at my grandmother. At her silver bun and her reading glasses on top of her head, and the small, contained smile she was wearing. And I felt something enormous and slightly embarrassing happening in my chest. Gran, I said, you're feeding half the street. Oh, not half, she said, turning back to her book. Don't exaggerate. It's barely a dozen over the course of a week. A dozen. On a good week, she allowed. Now stop fussing and drink your tea. It'll go cold. Chapter 4. In which the Kowalski family has several feelings at once. I am not, as previously established, a paranoid person. But I am absolutely the kind of person who calls her cousin from a car park before she's even pulled out of the driveway, because there are revelations that simply cannot wait 90 minutes. Marcus, I said, before he'd finished saying hello. You need to hear something. I told him. He was quiet for a long time, which for Marcus is essentially the emotional equivalent of falling to his knees in a cathedral. She's been feeding people, he said finally. Off her front step. In secret. For 3 years. Yes. And we've been going down there and stealing the food. Essentially, yes. Another pause. Kate, he said, in a very small voice. I took a whole lasagna. I know. I told my flatmates I made it. Marcus. I got compliments. The family WhatsApp group that night was something to behold. I broke the news in what I thought was a measured, thoughtful message, and the thread exploded with the kind of energy usually reserved for sports finals and unexpected celebrity divorces. My cousin Delia sent approximately 11 messages in 5 minutes, each containing a different emoji in various states of emotional collapse. Uncle Rob, who is not normally a demonstrative man, simply replied, "Oh my God," in lowercase, which from him was practically a soliloquy. My mother called me directly rather than texting, because she is of a generation that believes some things are too important for typing. Your grandmother, she said, in a voice that suggested she was sitting down for this conversation, has been running a community meal program out of her front hallway. Essentially, without telling anyone. She thought we'd interfere. She's not wrong, my mother said, after a brief pause. Your Aunt Diane would absolutely have made a banner. She wasn't wrong about that either. Aunt Diane loves a banner. The question that occupied the family group for the next 2 hours was, quite reasonably, what on earth to do with this information? The options, as I saw them, were do nothing and simply stop taking Gran's food. Respectable, but somehow insufficient. Offer to help in some official capacity. Risky, given Gran's predictions about Facebook posts and Derek's dignity. Or find some third path that honored what Gran was doing without turning it into a production. It was Marcus who came up with the solution, which surprised everyone including Marcus. We just, he said, over a video call that had somehow expanded to include 8 Kowalskis in various states of evening attire. Start going down more often. And we bring stuff. And we help fill the fridge. But we don't make it a thing. We make it not a thing, Delia said slowly, as if testing the concept. We make it aggressively not a thing, Marcus confirmed. We drop by, we bring food, we say we were in the neighborhood. We're never in the neighborhood, Pete objected. We have a cup of tea, we leave. And Gran gets to keep doing what she's doing without it becoming a whole production. There was a silence on the call that felt thoughtful rather than empty. That's actually, my mother started, and then stopped, and then said, Marcus, that's very sensible. Marcus looked briefly startled by this assessment. Cheers, he said. I have my moments. And then Pete, who had been quiet for a few minutes in the way that meant he was either sulking or thinking, unmuted himself and said, I want to propose something. And I need everyone to commit before they laugh. Pete, Aunt Diane said, the last time you said that you signed us all up for a 5K. This is better than a 5K. Almost anything is. The point is, Pete said, with the dignity of a man who has jogged a 5K in 42 minutes, and is still not over it. Gran keeps telling Delia that the fridge is getting full and she can't always get through everything before it turns. What if we each started driving down once a month and... He paused for theatrical effect. Stealing a container? Silence. Not actually stealing, he clarified. Obviously. We'd bring groceries to make up for it. But we'd take one container each. And we'd make a whole thing of sneaking it past her. And she'd pretend to be annoyed, and we'd help lighten the load without her having to ask for help, because she never asks for help. She really doesn't, Delia confirmed. And we'd get to see her more, and she'd get to pretend to tell us off, which she clearly enjoys. She really does, I agreed. And the whole thing would be a joke that everyone's in on except we're all also actually genuinely helping. Pete sat back. So, who's in? 8 hands went up with more or less simultaneous enthusiasm. Brilliant, Pete said, looking genuinely pleased with himself. Operation Steal Gran's Food begins next weekend. That name, my mother said, is never leaving this call. Agreed, said everyone. Chapter 5. In which everyone gets what they needed all along. The first official Operation Steal Gran's food took place on a Saturday in November, and I want to go on record as saying that watching my 6'2" cousin Marcus attempt to tiptoe out of a bungalow with a container of beef and vegetable stew is one of the funniest things I have ever personally witnessed. We'd arranged it in advance, but only among ourselves. Gran was left in blissful ignorance, which meant that when Marcus discovered the containers stacked on the counter, he'd been sent to the kitchen on the invented errand of fetching another sleeve of biscuits, and appeared in the living room doorway with one tucked under his arm and the expression of a man deeply committed to a bit. Gran looked up from her crossword and went very still in the way of someone rapidly assessing a situation. "Marcus James Kowalski," she said. "I was just. That is not yours. I was helping with the load," he said, with enormous injured dignity. "You can't carry all these yourself, Gran. I'm being considerate." "You're being a menace is what you're being." But her mouth was doing something around the corners that it does when she's trying not to smile. "Put it back. I could take 2. He offered generously. "Save you the trouble." "1. She said finally, in a tone of profound martyrdom. "You can have 1. And you'll bring me back the container next time." "Obviously," he said, with the high moral authority of someone who had just been caught stealing soup. He brought it home and ate it over 2 evenings and texted the family group to report that it was. And he stood by this assessment, the best thing he'd eaten since Christmas. Not helpful competitively, he clarified, just statistically. The system, once established, settled into a rhythm with the beautiful efficiency of something that has found its correct shape. We rotated visits so Gran had company most weekends without any single one of us being run ragged with the drive. We brought groceries, coordinated loosely through the family group so she didn't end up with 17 blocks of cheddar, though honestly Gran seemed to go through cheddar at a rate that suggested she'd found an industrial application for it. And we took a container each, with the elaborate pantomime of being caught every single time. And Gran told us off with increasing creativity while accepting the groceries with the practiced grace of someone who has learned to receive help when it arrives wearing a costume. It was Delia who started bringing extra. Not making a thing of it. Just arriving with a car full of bags instead of 2. On the grounds that she'd gone a bit wild at the cash and carry, which was transparently fictional but which everyone agreed to take at face value. Marcus started doing the same. Then Pete, whose bulk purchases were particularly impressive given that he lived in a studio flat and clearly had nowhere to put bulk quantities of tinned tomatoes. "I got a good deal," he told Gran, unloading 17 cans from a bag for life. "You certainly got a lot of a deal," she agreed, helping him find space in the cupboard. I went down on a Wednesday evening in December, which was unusual enough that Gran raised an eyebrow when she opened the door. "Slow week at work," I said. "You work in project management," she said. "Wednesdays are never slow." I took the afternoon off. She considered this. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." We had tea, and I helped her with the afternoon's batch. She'd started letting me help, without comment, the way she let me dry the dishes when I offered. Not acknowledging it, just making space for it. I filled containers while she checked her list. We'd found a companionable groove in it, the way you find a groove in any task done together long enough, and for a while neither of us said very much. "The engineering student," I said eventually. "You mentioned she doesn't eat enough." "Finals coming up," Gran said, snapping a lid closed with the conviction of someone who has opinions about proper nutrition during exam season. I've been putting in extra carbohydrates. You need energy for mathematics. Do you know her name? Priya. She's from Coventry originally. She wants to work in renewable energy. Gran looked at the container in her hands with the expression of someone who is extremely satisfied by this information. I told her she should. How often do you talk to them? To any of them? Occasionally. It varies. She set the container down. Most of the time they just take what's there and go. That's the point. You can't make someone feel helped. You have to make them feel like they just happened to find what they needed. I thought about that on the drive home, through the dark December motorway with the radio on low, and I thought about it again when I got back to my apartment and put Gran's stolen container. Mushroom and barley, as it turned out, absolutely spectacular. In the fridge for tomorrow's lunch. I thought about the factory worker who didn't want his colleagues to see. About the retired gentleman who was too proud to tell his son. About Priya from Coventry who was going to build wind turbines or solar panels or something genuinely important, fueled in part by my grandmother's opinions about carbohydrates during exam season. I thought about Gran at her kitchen counter every afternoon, filling containers with the calm efficiency of someone who has found a task that fits them exactly, whose refrigerator is always full, because she has made it her personal mission to ensure that it is. Who had watched her well-meaning grandchildren march in and take her food for 4 months without saying a word, because she understood something about pride and help and the necessary gap between them that the rest of us were still learning. I thought about what she'd said. People have their pride. It's easier for them to take it this way. And then I thought about what we were doing. The elaborate theft, the invented errands to the cash and carry, the container we each took home with the solemn performance of people who have gotten away with something. And I realized that Gran had done exactly the same thing for us. She'd let us help. She'd made space for us to arrive with our overstuffed bags and our guilty consciences and our stolen soup, and she'd told us off just enough to make it feel like a game rather than a kindness, and she'd never once said, "Thank you," in a way that would have made any of us feel we'd done something worthy of thanks, because that would have changed what it was. She'd given us the easier way, too. The same as everyone else. I called her the next morning, which was a Thursday, which was outside our normal rotation, which meant she answered with a slight pause before she said hello that told me she was already working out what I was up to. I just wanted to call, I said. Did you? She said. Not a question. Doing the same work as before. I ate the barley soup for lunch. It needs a day in the fridge, she said, with some satisfaction. The flavors settle. It was really good. I know. I laughed. She laughed too, the quiet kind that she doesn't give out freely, and for a moment neither of us said anything. And it was the easiest silence I could remember in a long time. Gran, I said. I think Derek is very lucky. A pause. He works very hard, she said, which was not a disagreement. So do you. Oh, I enjoy it, she said easily, as though 3 years of quietly feeding her neighbors was simply an agreeable way to pass an afternoon, which for her, I was coming to understand, it genuinely was. It keeps me busy. And the containers come back washed, which is more than I can say for some people. I always wash the containers, I said, with great dignity. You do? She allowed. You're a good girl, Katie. Very nosy, but good. I learned it somewhere. She made a sound that was possibly a scoff and possibly something warmer, and said she had to go because she needed to check on something in the oven. And we said goodbye, and I sat in my apartment with my phone in my hand. And the empty container on the table. And the particular warmth of someone who has, finally, understood a joke they've been inside for much longer than they knew. The fridge, needless to say, was full again when Marcus went down that Saturday. He texted the family group a photo of it. The ordered shelves, the precise containers. The daikon radish that I'm now fairly convinced is simply a permanent fixture. With the caption, "She's restocked. Operation continues." Gran did not have a smartphone and was therefore unable to respond. But somehow I felt certain that, wherever she was in that house, at the kitchen counter, or in her armchair with her book, or standing at the front door listening for footsteps on the pavement, she knew perfectly well what we were up to. And was, in her own quiet, pleased about it way, entirely fine with that. Some people change the world loudly. Others do it with a shelf full of containers and a very precise opinion about the chutney preferences of their neighbors. Gran, it is fair to say, was firmly in the second camp. And the neighborhood, though it didn't know her name, ate rather better for it.